This is the story of a trip we took on the GSLA, our good ship love affair, a North Sea 34, which some folks call a good all-around boat. That's me, Tim, standing on her foredeck taking this video on my iPhone. When it's calm, sometimes the water is a mirror. On the Monday morning of August 31st, 2020, we woke at 4:45 a.m., inhaled a little bit of breakfast and a good bit of coffee, and left Eric and Gita's new home in Garden Bay near Pender Harbor, intending to catch two ferries, the first at Earl's Cove and the second at Powell River. Since early August, our sailboat, the GSLA, had been roaming the Broughton Archipeligo, a group of islands on the northeastern flank of the Queen Charlotte Strait on the coast of British Columbia, Canada, near the northern tip of Vancouver Island. The northbound trip up from our moorage in the Salish Sea, I understand, was wonderful. And subsequently, additional tall nautical tales had been earned by others of the GSLA crew, but I was not there, and those stories are to be told by other sailors on other occasions. This boating trip, the essential end-of-season return to harbor, planned for weeks, was now in jeopardy. Yet again, the next voyage of the GSLA had been cast into doubt by its uncooperative Yanmar diesel engine. Over the last week, the beast had been getting more and more difficult to start, to the point where the previous crew had been, for a time, stranded at Alert Bay on Cormorant Island. Local natives had come to the rescue, miraculously coaxing the old motor back to life, and the GSLA had made it back to harbor at Fort McNeil. Our mission that first day was to get up to Port McNeil early enough in the day to find and commission a good diesel mechanic with the hope of resolving the engine starting issue. Thomas kept his right foot stomped heavily down on the gas pedal of his 12-cylinder ex-RCMP cruiser, convincingly getting us onto both ferries and up to Fort McNeil before 1 p.m. I personally hadn't seen the old engine since the trip Ruth and I took back in July at a time when it was working well. As soon as I had got on board, I started pulling the thing apart, looking for an air leak I presumed I might find somewhere in the fuel injection system. Within minutes, I had found several loose bolts when Scott, our Australian mechanic, arrived shortly later. He confirmed that those loose connections, which he quickly tightened up with a few deft twists of his wrench, were likely all or at least part of our engine starting problem. We were elated.
Another glass of wine.
Right.
And then
However, for some mysterious reason, he looked suspiciously at the engine, evidently suspecting something else was amiss. Pulling up on the valve lifters at the top of the engine, we all observed a torrent of water gushing out of the engine's air intake. The elation we felt a moment earlier sunk into the bilge.
oh fuck. That's salt water.
We were devastated. At that moment, Thomas was, for some reason, crawling around inside the narrow storage area under the cockpit, a claustrophobic space we call the back 40. Scott asked him if he could look at the condition of a breather tube that runs from the engine to the stern, part of the exhaust system. Thomas replied almost immediately that he had identified the tube, an old length of repurposed garden hose, and that there was a bad kink in it. Thought so, Scott said, explaining to us that if the breather tube ever plugged or kinked, back pressure as the engine cools could suck salt water from the wet exhaust muffler back up into the engine. His expression was grave. If salt water ever gets into an engine, he explained, it immediately begins to corrode it from the inside. Our engine might be damaged or even ruined. Depends on how long it's been in there, said Scott. None of us had realized that our old Yanmar was at huge risk due to a length of kinked garden hose some previous owner had stupidly chosen as the exhaust breather tube. We'll see what happens when we try to start it. Turning the engine with the injectors removed, he blew most of the water out of the engine. We reassembled it, dealt with the kinky garden hose, and after multiple attempts, the damn thing did start. And after a while, sounded reassuringly okay. Yes, he said, you should be able to make it home over the next 3 or 4 days, but corrosion might set in after that. You'll just have to wait and see. On his advice, we ran the engine and changed the oil and filter 3 times over the course of that day to try to get as much salt as possible out of the engine. The oil came out an ugly, milky gray color during the first 2 changes. Following the third and final oil change, we ran the engine, and this time the oil looked okay. Finally, the GSLA was set to go. On Tuesday morning, the 1st of September, we woke before 5 a.m. The engine started reasonably easily. We cast off and were underway in total darkness by 6 a.m. Visibility was near 0, and after sailing north of the light on Cormorant Island, there were no lights, markers, or landmarks visible in any direction to indicate where we were. The night before, Eric had articulated some sort of twisted rationale for getting started so early, and evidently Thomas and I were too exhausted mentally to challenge him. The darkness, it turned out, was preventing us from appreciating how thick the fog surrounding us actually was. An hour later, we knew that the sun had risen, not because we could see where it was in the sky, but because our surroundings had gone from total blackness to total whiteness. We were steaming through pea soup, fog, and light rain, visibility not more than 10 or 20 meters. I was terrified. A water taxi suddenly emerged from the whiteness and flashed by just to our stern. The GSLA had probably appeared as a blip on the water taxi's radar, but we had no way to know what might lie in the water just ahead of us. We strained to see into the fog. Small islands would suddenly become visible when we were within meters of the shoreline. Although I was shaking, Eric seemed delighted. "This is the real thing," he said, or some sort of nonsense like that. I looked at him suspiciously. We passed Donegal Head, the west point of Malcolm Island, and turned north toward Bonwick Island, heading into open water. Suddenly, and in the space of 2 minutes, nearer to the boat, we saw porpoises, sea lions, and whales. An islet suddenly appeared that looked like a submarine. I sent a message with the photo to Ruth, titled "Russian Submarine." At that time, she was driving her way down the Sunshine Coast, visiting with friends along the way. "What is it?" she texted back. "Russian submarine," I replied. "No way," was the reply. Decided to come clean. "Island," I replied. We cruised south of Bonwick Island, keeping Guilford Island on the starboard side, past Baker Island to Simoom Sound. The fog lifted somewhat, and the rain eased off as the day wore on. We docked briefly at Paddler's Inn, where we spoke with the couple who run the outpost, asking about moorage. None being available, and with plenty of time before dark, we carried on to the Birdwood group of islands, where we saw a modern set of petroglyphs painted by members of the local First Nation. From there, we entered Tribune Channel, which was filled with tons of wood debris. At the mouth of Wakana Bay, we dropped our prawn trap, then headed up into the bay, where we anchored for the night, surrounded by acres of floating wood, but no other boats. Eric's rationale for another ungodly before 5 a.m. rousting was somewhat more solid on Wednesday morning. The waters ahead of us featured a series of narrow passages which run with rapid tidal currents, laced with fierce whirlpools. These currents can be so strong that going into them, our boat with engine at full throttle would not make headway. Going with the current is the better plan, though getting caught in a whirlpool risks swamping or being dashed onto rocks. That morning, we had to get underway early enough that our passage through Chatham Channel would take place before mid-afternoon, after which the currents would be too risky. We collected the trap and set out along Tribune Channel. The dawn opened into clear skies. Plowing through thick wood debris, we took Sargent Passage out into Night Inlet, where we saw a humpback whale and enjoyed a wonderful, massive breakfast of crab meat, eggs, butter, a massive intake of saturated fats. When we got to Chatham Channel, the current was rapidly picking up, and we raced through the narrow channel at 10 knots, peaking at 12 knots. Fortunately, it was steady water without much whirlpool, so exhilarating. On through Havana Channel, then turning eastward at the Broken Islands, we headed out into Johnston Strait, where finally there was wind and we set our sails. This is where we encountered aquatic visitors. Later in the afternoon, we came in through Sunderland Channel, dropped our trap, and anchored in Douglas Bay, Forward Harbor. Eric and I hiked a short trail to a bay on Sutherland Channel and picked huckleberries. One other boat joined us at a distance in the anchorage that night. On Thursday morning, we were up very early, departing from Douglas Bay in the dark at 5 a.m. Again, currents were the justification, though I was becoming increasingly suspicious that someone was messing with the fact that I am not in the least, and never have been, a morning person. In the dark, we managed to find the float and raise the prawn trap with its single occupant. We took on Wellborn Channel and Whirlpool Rapids, encountering at slack tide very little action. Suddenly, there was time to kill before entering the next set of rapids. Dawn over Chancellor Channel was spectacular. Trolling for salmon was fun, but unfortunately netted no fish. At Beaver Inlet, we floated freely next to a beautiful waterfall, and for breakfast enjoyed some very special rice flour crab cakes. Onward then, through the Green Point Rapids, and then going as fast as we could to get to Dent Rapids in time for the start of flood tide. Thomas took the helm through Dent Rapids, past Devil's Hole and Gillard Passage. At this point, to share in the fun, I took the helm and steered past Whirlpool Point and through Ucolta Rapids.
Yeah. Yeah. There'll be some movement here, guys. Yeah.
I would stay up that guy if you can. I'm going to go around this pool here and head up that way.
Yeah. And then you take a hard starboard there.
And full starboard.
Yeah.
Oh, there it goes.
Good. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so far so good.
Yeah.
Is this called Whirlpool Point?
Yeah.
Okay. I think so. I'll buy that.
Ripping up some fish up there. Is that the same sea lion that we had? That's Sonora Lodge where we had that sea lion do that. We should, yeah.
Okay.
See?
I
Is
see
that
a big
one log?
Yeah. I see two. I'm going to go in between them. There's one right part starboard, and there's one soft port.
Fighting off the seagulls right now.
Out here in the middle, I don't have to worry about the amount of water.
Nope. Yeah, plenty.
All right, good.
It's just wood.
Keeping it pointed straight.
Yeah, there's that.
After we got through the rapids, the waters opened up at that point for some highway sailing from South Point of Stewart Island, keeping Sonora Island, Morel Island, and Cortez Island on starboard side. There was unfortunately no wind, but lots of sunshine. We docked at Refuge Cove and took on fuel and a few groceries. From there, we crossed over to Cortez Bay. In the waters off Cortez, before we entered the bay, we saw at a distance a small pod of gray whales.
How close?
I think it's.
What's the limit?
I think it's up backs maybe. Yeah. Thanks, bye. They're just lying there.
They are just hanging out.
Yeah.
This is amazing.
Yeah. Need to take steering? I'll be happy.
Sure. Yeah. Just come in whatever the legal distance is.
Yeah.
I think it's probably 100 meters. Yeah, like that.
Behind?
What?
Should we cut behind the island?
Wow. Awesome. They're back. Ooh. So cool because like the sun is backlighting these guys so perfectly. A little bit bright, but you know, like this is, look at, whoa! So cool.
The night was spent anchored in tranquil Cortez Bay. Friday morning, we made early departure. What the hell, I said to myself. There's nothing for it. We headed straight south toward busy Comox Harbor, where we managed to secure temporary moorage rafted to another sailboat. Brad and Heather had very kindly driven up to Fort McNeil to collect Thomas's RCMP mobile. Brad had driven it back down to Comox and appeared at the dock when we tied up just after noon. The plan was for the GSLA to be moved a few weeks later up the Puntledge River to a winter moorage. Once our backpacks and miscellanea had been hauled out from the boat and into the RCMP mobile we drove off. Of course, it is always sad, leaving a love affair behind. But the story doesn't end there. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was Gita. She had just received a call from the harbor master at the Hospital Bay Marina, steps from Eric and Gita's new house, where the GSLA had been on a waiting list for the past 3 years. A spot had just opened up. Within the span of a minute, plans changed completely. Brad was dropped off at his truck. Eric and I grabbed a few things and were dropped off back at the marina, and Thomas headed off for the next Comox ferry. We went to the marina office, announced a cancellation of our moorage, and the plan to winter the GSLA on the Puntledge River. We revved up the engine, and within minutes were out crossing the Salish Sea. Near sundown, we turned the corner at the north end of Texada Island and headed down Marispina Strait. Darkness fell. I held watch on the bow for logs and other debris while Eric piloted south of Nelson Island. The water flowing past the bow was filled with magical sparkles of phosphorescence. I would love to show a picture of this exquisite natural phenomena, but my attempts prove that the human eye, conditioned to the dark, remains more sensitive than the best handset camera. It was after 10 o'clock when we finally arrived in Hospital Bay. Thomas and Gita were there to greet us when we arrived. There and then, the story ends.